Welcome to Protected Cultivation course again. We'll talk today about the management of the energy balance in a greenhouse, which is a very important issue for the proper management and effective use of the greenhouses. In this lesson, I'll talk first about the greenhouse as a system. So we'll explain what are the components and what are the characteristics of this system. Then we'll talk about the energy gain in a greenhouse, and we'll explain what is the mechanism of the energy gain and what are the main factors of collecting energy into the greenhouse. Then later we'll talk about the losses, the energy losses in the greenhouse, and the main components of the energy losses from a greenhouse, following with some simple calculation on greenhouse heating and simple methods of greenhouse heating. And finally, because again the greenhouse is a system, we'll talk also about the cooling mechanisms of the greenhouse and cooling methods in a greenhouse. As I said before, the greenhouse can be considered as a system which is composed by three main components: the internal atmosphere, the crop, and the soil. The latter is often considered as the main thermal mass of the system. And on the other side, the behavior of the whole systems depends on the interactions among these components, but also on the outside climate of the site where the greenhouse is situated. The presence of the crop in a greenhouse is very important, because the crops with their own internal control processes, like for example stomatal regulation, are fundamental in the determination of the system behavior. Indeed, when the set points can be maintained, whatever the outside climate and the plant response is, the control of the system is perfect and the growth and development of the crop is optimal, in the sense that it will correspond to the objectives and planning of the grower. And in fact, this is the case in the sophisticated computer-controlled glasshouses in Northern Europe. On the contrary, when only a partial control of the greenhouse microclimate is possible, the inside environment will depend both on the changes of the outside weather and on the response of the plant to its immediate environment. In turn, the immediate environment, this time imperfectly controlled, will depend at some extent on the response of the crops itself. And this is why the knowledge and modeling of the crop physiologic responses, in particular the transpiration and photosynthesis, to environment factors are fundamental for understanding why and how the greenhouse system evolves under a given external action, like for example ventilation, shading, and it is also important for predicting and controlling the behavior of the system as a whole. The greenhouse thermal behavior have some general characteristics which should be kept in mind. First, the greenhouse itself has a limited thermal mass, and as I said before, the soil is the most important component of its thermal mass. This implies that the climatic external perturbations will not be significantly damped or lagged by the greenhouse itself. The changes in greenhouse environment will result mostly from the external changes, unless they are fully corrected or controlled by an efficient climate control system. Secondly, The diurnal greenhouse effect. We'll talk about this greenhouse effect and in the next slide. It's mainly due to the confining of the air in the greenhouse enclosure. And the ventilation is an effective way to decrease the so-called greenhouse effect by increasing the overall heat losses from the greenhouse through the enhancing the ventilation rate of the greenhouse. And last, the canopy transpiration has a predominant role in the determinism of the greenhouse environment, and more precisely on the temperature and vapor pressure deficit. We'll talk about this in details later on. This is why the control of evaporative processes is so important in the greenhouse cropping. Let's talk now about the greenhouse energy gain, which of course is a very important phenomenon in the greenhouse production. Through that, the solar energy is being collected and saved into the greenhouse. The energy gain in a greenhouse is a result of two different effects. First, it is a kind of a confinement effect resulting from the decrease in the air exchange with the outside environment, but most importantly, it is an effect caused by the existence of a cover characterized by high transparency to sunlight and on the contrary, a low transparency to the far infrared radiation, the radiation which is emitted by the crop, the soil, and the inner greenhouse element. Entirely, we call this process as a greenhouse effect, and this is the main reason of the solar energy accumulation in a greenhouse. Schematically, this greenhouse effect can be expressed by this diagram here, which is received from Fitz and Rodriguez, a paper of Fitz and Rodriguez of 2010. And as you can see it from this graph here, the total amount of solar radiation which reaches the surface of the soil, which falls into the roof of the greenhouse, is partially absorbed by the glazing materials, this component alpha here. It is partially reflected back, and this vectors, the size of this vector depends very much on the angle of the roofs, and a significant part of it is entering into the greenhouse. And of course, the ratio between the total amount of solar radiation which enters into the greenhouse with the respective total amount of the solar radiation which reaches the surface of the glazing materials is called it's a very important physical or optical parameter of the glazing materials, and we called it light transmittance coefficient, and we've talked about it in the first lesson of this course. And then the amount of energy which is entering into the greenhouse is partially absorbed by the plants, and therefore it is converted into the energy of evaporated water, or transpired water, from the plants, and the other part of it is heating the surface of the soil of the greenhouse and the other object of the greenhouse, and transmitting the energy of quantums to the soil particles, which as a result are raising the temperature. And as you know from the physics, a warm body then in this case soil surface, is radiating some energy. But since also based on some laws from the physics, the length of waves by which a warm body is radiating its energy is in disproportional with the temperature of the body. It's understandable that the length of the waves by which the soil is radiating the energy is much longer than of the respective wavelengths of the solar radiation. So a much larger portion of this energy radiated by the soil surface cannot go through the glazing materials, but it stands inside the greenhouse, and this leads to a gradually increased temperature of the greenhouse air. And you can see it from this graph here, that the amount of vectors which are expressing the respective amount of energy goes out is much smaller than the length of the vector which is expressing the amount of the energy which is entering into the greenhouse. This is again the reason that we have a gradual accumulation of solar energy in a greenhouse and a gradually increased temperature of the greenhouse air. In this lesson we'll talk first about the greenhouse as a system. So we'll explain what are the components and what are the characteristics of this system. Then we'll talk about the energy gain in a greenhouse, and we'll explain what is the mechanism of the energy gain and what are the main factors of collecting energy into the greenhouse. Then later we'll talk about the losses, the energy losses in the greenhouse, and the main components of the energy losses from a greenhouse, following with some simple calculation on greenhouse heating and simple methods of greenhouse heating. And finally, because again the greenhouse is a system, we'll talk also about the cooling mechanism of the greenhouse and cooling methods in a greenhouse. Okay, from the physical point of view, the greenhouse can be considered as solar collectors, and as we explained it before. But however, there is a significant difference with the simple solar collectors, and this is indeed the presence of leaf area of the plants and of the transpiring surface, which will give in fact a very special importance to the latent heat transfer processes in a greenhouse. So practically the total amount of energy collected or energy gain in a greenhouse can be divided in two main components: the sensible energy component, HS. You can see it from the formula here, that indeed is filling when you enter a greenhouse and serves to heat the greenhouse air. This is the component which contributes to increase the temperature of the air in the greenhouse. And the next component is the latent energy component, i.e., which in fact represents the evapotranspiration rate of the crop, or otherwise it expresses the amount of energy which is accumulated in the greenhouse and in the form of the energy used or spent to transform the water from the liquid stage to vapor. And understandably, higher is the amount of the water vapor in a greenhouse, higher is the absolute humidity of a greenhouse, higher it is its latent energy component. In an example taken by this author, Taqi, Murtaza, and the authors in the paper published in 2018, you can see how this total energy gain is split it in a specific greenhouse. As you can see that from total of 27.7 megajoules per day per square meter, it is nearly 7 megajoules were being reflected back, and the rest is utilized in a greenhouse. And then you can see the ratio between the latent heat, the amount of energy which is being spent for water transpiration from the plant leaves, and the rest is turned to sensible heat and increased, which, as I said, increases the temperature of the air inside the greenhouse and cause the so-called greenhouse effect.